Rain whispered against the tall windows of St. Bridget's Hospital, a steady rhythm that matched the pulse of machines and the weary shuffle of shoes on polished floors. The corridors stretched long and empty, washed in the cold glow of fluorescent lights, carrying the smell of disinfectant and sleeplessness. Hospitals never truly rested. They simply changed the volume of their worry. At the far end of the hall, a single door stood half open, leaking green light onto the linoleum, and inside that light a story waited. Nurse Alina Reyes moved like a quiet metronome through the small room. Her blue scrubs creased, her yellow gloves trembling slightly as she checked the child on the bed. Liam Carter, 8 years old, lay motionless beneath a blanket thin as paper, his face too pale for mourning. Beside her, Dr. Marcus Hale, tall, careful, a man who hid behind data, watched the heart monitor as though his eyes alone might hold the line steady. The beeps came slower now, softer, each one an unanswered question. "Vitals are fading," he said, voice level but tired. Alina didn't answer. She pressed 2 fingers to the boy's wrist, feeling for a pulse she could no longer find, her lips moving in a prayer she didn't realize she was saying. Every nurse, she thought, eventually learns to live between faith and science. Tonight, that thin space felt like home. Lightning flared through the blinds, momentarily painting the walls white. The storm outside matched the one in her chest. She adjusted the IV line, murmuring to the boy as if words could coax him back. "Come on, sweetheart. You've still got a sunrise waiting." The monitor answered with a long pause that stretched too far. Marcus glanced at the clock. "We're losing him." "Not yet," she whispered, though her voice cracked under its own hope. The next sound was the one every healer dreads, a single continuous tone, flat, merciless. For a heartbeat she froze, mind blank until instinct replaced despair. "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "He's not done." She pressed her palms to his chest and began compressions, counting under her breath not in numbers but in promises. Marcus stepped closer, his hand half raised to stop her, then lowered it again. Something in her face, fierce and breaking at once, told him that interruption would be betrayal. The storm outside roared louder. The fluorescent light flickered. Her gloves squeaked against the fabric as she pushed again and again, tears blurring the lines between effort and emotion. She remembered her grandmother's lullaby, "Hush now, the angels are walking," and repeated it between breaths until it became rhythm. Seconds became minutes. The body beneath her hands was small, frighteningly still. When her arms began to shake, she pressed harder. "You promised me a smile, Liam. Don't make me go looking for it somewhere else." Then, just as she spoke, the monitor twitched. A single spike, then silence. Another spike. Then a beep, thin but alive. Marcus leaned forward, disbelief fighting through exhaustion. "Alina." She stopped counting, hands hovering in midair. The green line rose again, faint and erratic but moving. Another beep, then another. The sound filled the room like rain returning to drought. She laughed once, startled by the joy of it, then sank back against the wall, covering her face. Marcus checked the vitals, adjusting the oxygen line. "It's real," he said quietly. She looked up at him, eyes wide with relief that looked almost like pain. "I told you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not yet." Outside, the thunder began to fade, replaced by the soft hiss of early morning rain. Inside, color crept back into the boy's cheeks. For the first time in hours, the machine sounded musical. The doctor exhaled, a sound somewhere between disbelief and gratitude, while the nurse sat trembling in silence, realizing she had just argued with death, and won. Somewhere beyond the glass, the first edge of dawn pushed against the clouds, a sliver of gold promising that the night would end. She stayed there for a long time, unable to trust the stillness. The monitor kept its rhythm, soft even, human, and each pulse seemed to echo in her own chest. The worst was over, but her body hadn't heard the news yet. Her shoulders ached, her breath came in shallow pulls, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Marcus stood beside her, his clipboard forgotten, his eyes on the boy. "Stabilize him," he said automatically, then corrected himself quieter. "He's stable." Alina pushed a stray curl from her forehead and nodded. Neither of them spoke again for several minutes. They didn't need to. The machines did the talking now, and every quiet beep was an answered prayer. Outside, the gray sky began to blush. The storm had spent itself, and the world was rinsed clean. Alina turned toward the window, watching the first light slide across the sill. "You ever think about why we do this?" she asked softly. Marcus tilted his head. because walking away hurts worse. Her laugh was small but real. That's not in any textbook. He smiled, an unsteady, unfamiliar expression, and looked back at Liam. Maybe it should be. The camera would linger on them there, the tired nurse and the equally tired doctor, standing shoulder to shoulder, each pretending the moment was ordinary, though both knew it wasn't. The ward beyond their door began to stir. Voices, footsteps, the low clatter of breakfast trays. But inside room 214, time moved differently. The fluorescent glare dimmed as natural light filled the space, gentler, golden. Alina adjusted the blanket under Liam's chin, with the care of someone tucking in her own memories. Marcus watched her and finally asked, "Why him? Out of all the ones we lose, why this one?" She kept her eyes on the boy. "Because someone once stayed for me," she said, and the words hung between them like a secret too heavy to explain. He didn't ask again. He simply nodded and looked at the monitor, pretending to study it, though what he really studied was the courage standing beside him. The intercom crackled. End of night shift. "Report to station." Alina didn't move. Her coffee from hours ago sat cold on the counter, untouched. Marcus poured 2 fresh cups and set one beside her. "Here," he said. "It's terrible, but it's hot." She smiled and accepted it, their fingers brushing briefly. An exchange of warmth, not romance, just recognition. "You saved him," he added quietly. She shook her head. "No, he saved us." Outside, sunlight reached the far wall, painting the room in long amber stripes. The city beyond the hospital yawned awake. Car engines, distant horns, the ordinary noise of life returning. Inside, everything felt still. Alina looked once more at the boy and whispered, "Welcome back." Marcus started toward the door, then hesitated. "Write it down," he said. "For the record." She considered, then smiled. No record would believe it. He chuckled under his breath. "Maybe that's the point." She met his eyes. "Some stories don't need proof." He nodded, leaving her with the last word. The door closed softly behind him. Alone again, Alina sank into the chair beside the bed. Her body was trembling from fatigue, but her mind refused to rest. She watched the tiny motion of Liam's chest, the steady line of his heartbeat, the way dawn light caught on the edge of the monitor and turned it gold. She thought of all the nights she hadn't been able to save someone, all the times hope had been a door that wouldn't open, and realized that maybe every failure had been a lesson in how to stand this long without falling. She reached out and touched the boy's hand gently. "Sleep," she murmured. "The world can wait." The camera would slowly pull back now, through the half-closed blinds out into the corridor, showing nurses beginning their morning rounds, the janitor pushing a mop across the floor, the coffee machine hissing like a waking heartbeat. The narrator's voice would fade in. Sometimes a miracle doesn't arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a woman who refuses to give up, through a boy who refuses to leave, through a night that finally decides to end. The frame would hold a moment longer on the door of room 214, sunlight spilling through the gap beneath it, proof that the darkness had kept its promise. And so the night shift closed, not with celebration, not with applause, but with 2 people too tired to smile and too grateful to sleep. In the language of hospitals, it was just another morning report, another patient stabilized.
In the language of hearts, it was everything.
For a world built on statistics, this was a story that didn't fit the chart. A boy who lived, a doctor who remembered how to believe, and a nurse whose hands had taught a heartbeat how to come home. Outside, the storm clouds drifted apart. Inside, the monitors hummed steady and strong. The world, for once, was quiet enough to listen. Morning slipped into the hospital quietly, soft light sliding across metal rails and plastic curtains, until even the tired shadows began to soften. The storm had rinsed the city clean, leaving the windows fogged with a silver glow. Alina sat beside Liam's bed, half asleep, her chin resting on folded arms. The night's adrenaline had drained away, replaced by a tremor that came from relief instead of fear. The boy breathed evenly now, each rise of his chest a small, perfect rhythm. For the first time in what felt like forever, the machines hummed not in warning but in harmony. The world outside was ordinary again, traffic returning, coffee brewing, people running late. But inside room 214, ordinary felt miraculous. Marcus appeared in the doorway, still in his coat, carrying 2 cups of coffee that steamed like proof of dawn. He paused, watching Alina the way one watches a sunrise, quietly, afraid to interrupt. When she finally stirred, he handed her a cup. "You should go home," he said softly. "You've been here all night." She gave a tired smile. "Home is here." He wanted to argue but didn't. Instead, he sat on the window ledge, looking out at the washed blue sky. "You know," he said, "I've been doing this 20 years. I've never seen anything like what happened last night." Alina took a slow sip of coffee, eyes on the boy. "Maybe you just weren't looking." The line landed gently between them, not as a challenge, but as a truth. Marcus leaned back, tracing the rim of his paper cup. "You really think it was more than science?" She shrugged. "Science is just a language for how the universe behaves. Sometimes it forgets the right words." They sat in comfortable silence then, the kind that fills a room like warmth. In the hall, nurses changed shifts, new footsteps echoed, and someone laughed. A bright, ordinary sound that felt like a gift. Alina checked Liam's vitals again, though she didn't need to. It was habit, a ritual of reassurance. Marcus watched her work and saw for the first time that compassion had muscle, that the quiet persistence he'd mistaken for stubbornness was actually strength. "You ever get tired of caring this much?" he asked. "Every day," she said. "And then I do it again." He smiled. "That's not fatigue. That's faith." She didn't answer, just tucked the blanket around Liam's shoulders and whispered something the boy wouldn't hear but the world might. Hours passed, like sighs. The sunlight climbed higher and the air smelled faintly of toast from the staff kitchen. Liam stirred once, mumbling, the ghost of a dream still on his face. Alina reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his wrist. "Easy, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're safe." Marcus watched, and something inside him shifted, a slow undoing of walls built from years of loss. He realized he had measured his career in survival rates in graphs when the real currency of healing was presence. Outside the window, a pair of pigeons landed on the sill, shaking off droplets of rain. Alina followed them with her eyes, smiling faintly. "See that?" she said. "Even the birds know when it's time to start over." Marcus nodded. "Guess we all do." The moment held, still and tender. By mid-morning, the ward was awake. Phones ringing, wheels rolling, the day's chaos beginning its climb. Yet room 214 stayed strangely calm, like a pocket of quiet the universe had forgotten to disturb. Marcus stood. "I have rounds," he said, hesitating at the door. "Get some sleep." "Later," she replied, too softly for him to argue. He left, and Alina turned back to the boy, the corners of her eyes folding into a smile. She reached for the small notebook she kept in her pocket, scribbled a few words, notes about dosage, timing, but also a line that read, "Still here." She closed it and slipped it away. Beyond the blinds, the morning widened, full of color. The storm had passed. So had the night. For a few precious hours, everything in the world seemed balanced on the steady sound of one boy's breathing. Alina leaned back, exhaled, and let her eyes close. The camera would linger on that, a nurse, a child, and a shaft of sunlight across a rumpled blanket, proof that sometimes survival looks exactly like rest. 3 years had passed, and the world felt softer somehow, as if the storm of that night had left a permanent sheen on everything it touched. Sunlight spilled through the windows of St. Bridget's with an easy golden authority, brushing the floors where Alina now walked with a confidence born from countless nights of knowing how to hold life in her hands. And yet today she moved lighter, freer, smiling at the hum of morning routines that no longer demanded the edge of panic. Liam, older now, his hair longer, his laughter unguarded, ran small hands along the rails as if the hospital had become a playground and not a battlefield. And when he spotted her, his face broke into a grin that reminded her why she stayed, why she fought, why the world's small victories were worth every sleepless hour. While Marcus, taller and steadier than she remembered, leaned against the nurse's station, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips, watching the two of them as though documenting a miracle only he could comprehend, noting how Liam's eyes sparkled with curiosity instead of fear, how Alina's posture spoke of endurance softened by tenderness, and in that quiet, unremarkable moment of the ordinary day, the hospital seemed to breathe with them, walls echoing with a harmony stitched from human courage and persistence. The corridors carried voices and footsteps like soft music, the smell of coffee drifting in from the staff lounge mingling with the crisp scent of linen. And yet amid all this, the past was never forgotten. The night of the storm, the long minutes spent arguing with death, the fragile spike of a heart monitor that had once decided everything. But those memories were no longer heavy. They were luminous, markers of resilience, proof that some nights could end in grace. Alina paused at Liam's door, watching him crouched over a picture he was drawing on the floor, colors spilling from his crayons like sunlight itself, and she realized that hope, once nurtured, had its own gravity, pulling life forward steadily, beautifully, unceasingly. Marcus joined her, handing her a cup of coffee, warmth in his palm and presence in his silence, and together they watched Liam without speaking. The room filled only with the quiet joy of a heartbeat well kept and a life well loved. And though 3 years had passed, the story that had begun with fear, with desperation, with trembling hands pressing against fragile skin, had matured into something infinitely simpler, yet infinitely richer. The proof that survival mattered, that care mattered, that human connection, the patient touch, the whispered reassurance, the steadfast refusal to give in, could indeed shape the course of a life. Outside, the city moved, cars and people marking ordinary rhythms. But inside St. Bridget's, in that sunlit room, time slowed, crystallized, and held a single truth. That every night, every storm, every trial had led to this, to a boy who laughed, a nurse who dared, and a doctor who believed, a quiet triumvirate of endurance, tenderness, and hope. And as the camera of memory would linger, it would linger on their smiles, the light catching dust motes in the sun, the warmth radiating like a pulse of life itself, proof that endings were beginnings, that miracles often walked softly, and that the heartbeat of a child once rescued could echo through the years like the most enduring song. And in the silent agreement of the three of them, Alina, Marcus, Liam, was the understanding that the past, no matter how dark, could always yield a present filled with light, laughter, and the steady certainty that love, courage, and dedication had at last found their reward.